Hi, my name is Isabella Zambrano, and today I'm going to be presenting on the language in rideshare. And if you aren't familiar, rideshare actually has hundreds and thousands of users today. It is an industry that is on the rise. It's almost comparable to the cab and taxi system, except that it is reported to be a lot more convenient because of the function that it has, that there is an app associated with it and everyone can use it on their phone since everyone today has a cell phone. And you can pull up the app and you can call your driver and instantly you'll have a rider. You'll have a driver so that you can go to whichever location you want. I think that this is one of the most interesting forms of communication because there are certain norms in place for this kind of, for this app on your phone, and I will be taking a deeper look into each of these and what they mean for communication. So when you, so I think that this is a form of media. This is because media is defined as a channel. It has consequentiality, much like language. So media is essentially language because you're trying to communicate something. And there's speed to it. Oftentimes it can transcend through the digital world, which is exactly what the Uber, Via, Lyft, Split, all these apps for rideshare, they all do these things in several different ways. So they're convenient because they have this option where you can just pay right away. You can link your credit card to it, and drivers are able to receive, the company's able to receive that payment, which then goes back to the drivers. Not only that, but it's a form of media because there is a rating system. Not only can you rate your driver and the experience you've had in a car, but also the driver can rate you as a rider, so that for the next time drivers are able to see what kind of rider they might be taking on into the car, which is very efficient, and I don't think that's something that could have ever been communicated in cabs or taxis before. You could just kind of didn't know what you were walking into because you were hailing them from whichever was convenient at your current location, which is the same idea, except this time you kind of know what car you're getting into, you know the name of the driver, and you also know how they typically have been rated in the past. But in saying that, media does have its constraints, which I think is often seen in in Uber itself, because it's media is not just what you put out, but it's also the reception. So you can't request the type of driver you want without being charged sometimes. So maybe you have requested a driver, you see the profile, maybe you've seen their past rating, and then sometimes depending on the app you use, if you cancel, you're charged. So you can't exactly choose what kind of driver you want. It's kind of a toss-up. Unless you keep canceling the drivers over and over again, which is a tedious function to do. So that is one constraint, that you can't exactly choose who you're riding with. You can't choose the kind of car that you're always in, but you can choose the size of the car. So I think that in itself, rideshare is a media for transportation, and it's a form of media for be able to communicate payments and things like that. So there are signs that are associated with rideshare, and they have certain values. So for example, so the word Uber, which is a name of one of the most famous rideshare industries, the Uber, the word itself, has developed a lot throughout the ages. So that's why you can't just look at words, you can't look at things diachronically. You actually have to look at them synchronically, which is something that was more looked at by Ferdinand Saussure. And if you look at this, if you look at the word Uber within time, within the context, you can see that it's much different than the dictionary definition. So the word Uber typically means to raise up, pick up, which is which typically, it has different definitions in the end, which is like grand and things like that. But if you would have looked at the way people used Uber in 2010 or 2009, they would have said things were uber lame or things were uber cool, which is definitely not how we use Uber today. People now associate the word Uber with a car. So most people would say, they're calling the Uber, or like, if the car says Uber, it doesn't explicitly say Uber, it tends to have the U that's famous with Uber, which I can show. And then also, it's based on cultural conventions, because in Germany, the word Uber means above and over. So it's not quite the same everywhere you go, and the word in particular cultural context has a specific meaning. So in our day and age, when you see the taxi logo, I didn't even know that there was a taxi logo, for example. I asked a lot of my interviewers, and they had no idea what the official logo of a taxi is. They just kind of said the color yellow. Which I think has a lot to do with more social media that is involved today in this day and age, in which rideshare did evolve out of. So people are able to associate these symbols. When they see them, they realize that there's either a car nearby, or there is a car service, and they are very aware of what these functions do in today's age, which are very different from about 20 years ago when they didn't exist. So there is a certain frame in place when you get into the Uber, the Lyft, the Split, whatever it is that you are using. A lot of my interviewers, when I asked them to walk me through a typical experience, and most of them use Uber, they told me the same exact thing, almost word for word. They would pull out their cell phone, they would open up the app, and then they would say request a ride. They would put in their destination and request a ride. This happened, and then they would wait on the side of the curb, they told me, usually for anywhere between 3 to 8 minutes, depending where they were. And then they said that the driver would come up, and the first thing they would ask is this for Michaela, or whatever your name is that they would put in place. And then the Uber driver would either nod or say yes, a verbal form of communication, and then they would go into the car. And usually the typical, they would go into the car and greet them and say, hello, how are you? And the Uber driver usually initiates the how are you today, and more further questions rather than just the hello, because you are getting into their car. And this type of frame can be in place into an Uber or Lyft or Split because of the fact that it is a more personal form of transportation. So it is someone's personal car, they are doing, this is like more personal communication rather than just getting into a metro bus, rather than getting into the metro itself, rather than taking a taxi, because the taxi is not the car of the driver necessarily. This car is someone's personal car that they've either driven their family in or their friends, and so it's a little more personal of a setting, and that's why the frame itself is a little bit changed than from a taxi or cab frame. So then there's the certain pragmatics that are in place once you get into the rideshare. So the pragmatics dictates what kinds of signs that are used, the language that's used. So if we were to look at this with ethnomethodology in mind, then you would, so what we keep in mind is that when people go into an Uber, there are certain topics that they talk about, certain topics that they stay away from. There are, certain limits to what you can do. There's turn taking in place. So an example of this, I kept asking people about typical conversations they would have in Ubers. Oftentimes people would say that they would talk about base level conversation, like the weather, like what are you studying, where are you from, where are you going? And then some people would actually say that if they form some kind of connection with those base level conversations, then they would go more in depthly. And I had someone who told me that they actually, heard someone's entire migration story from Lebanon to the United States. So it's very possible to form a more close connection because you are forced to be into this car with someone, and it is their personal car, and it makes room to form new ways of communication that you may not have had before. So, and then also, there is with the pull function. So When people get into the car with several other people, there are certain norms in place. So if you are the first one into the pool, a lot of people told me that it's, you know, you're the one that initiates the hello, but you can initiate, oh, where are you heading? But if you're the second person in the pool, you don't initiate that kind of conversation initially. And then there's the norm of splitting that's in place. So the pragmatics of it, which is totally digital, is where you just ask your friends to split with you, you request it, and they just do it. It's just something that they do. If they don't do it, then they're going to use some other kind of app to pay you back, or maybe they might do it in cash. So these are all possibilities. And I think ultimately that rideshare is an interesting form of communication, and depending whether they do it in the evening or at night, it also changes the entire pragmatics of it all and the context in which it's in, and people can either be more casual, it can be more formal in the day, or more casual at night. It really just depends, and I think that this definitely differs from a taxi or cab just because it is linked directly to your phone.